looking at share capital. So this is the first lesson of this topic, where we are going to look at the following issues. We are going to describe share capital. We are also going to look at the various types of share capital that we can have. We are also going to look at the alteration of share capital. Then in this lesson, we shall conclude by looking at the reduction of share capital. The reduction of share capital. So class, we can begin on the first item, where we are describing share capital of a company. The share capital of a company will be prescribed in the company's constitution, where they describe what the share capital of this company will be. Now, capital becomes share capital if the capital is divided into units that we have previously described as shares. So if the company's capital is divided into these units that we are referring to as shares, then we say our company has a share capital. That the capital of the company is divided into units that we are referring to shares, then that is the share capital of the company. Now, the company's share capital can be put into various categories, what we are considering as the types of share capital of the company. Types of share capital. The first type that we may have is what we refer to as the registered. The registered, also known as the authorized. Share capital. The registered or the authorized share capital. This, as the name registered suggests, this is the capital with which the company is registered with. The capital being divided into units that we are referring to as shares. It is also described as the maximum amount of capital that the company is allowed or authorized to issue. Hence the reference to authorized, the word authorized meaning the amount which the company is allowed by law to issue. That authorized amount is the amount with which the company has been registered with. Just to make this note, the fact that we have been registered with a particular amount of share capital, it does not mean that in the future we may not alter, we may not change that amount of share capital. That it is possible that in the future, this company may be changing, either to increase or to reduce its registered or authorized share capital. Now, the company will be at liberty to either issue the whole or simply part of this amount that is their registered share capital. From this registered share capital, it is possible to have what we are calling the issued share capital. This is also known as the allotted share capital. It is the share capital that the company has issued to the members. It is the subscribed share capital of the company. It is the amount of shares that members have taken up from the company and they have undertaken to give a consideration for. So out of the company's registered share capital, we noted that it is not compulsory for the company to issue the whole of it. So that part that they have issued, that part that has been subscribed for, that part that members have taken up and have committed to pay for, then it is that part that we are referring to as the issued share capital. Now, where this is part of the registered share capital, there is a balance that remains, which we are referring to, number 3, as the unissued share capital. The unissued share capital. That this is that part of the company's registered capital that members have not taken up. that the company has not issued. So this can be the subject matter of future issuing of shares by this company. Now, I would want us now to concentrate more on this issued share capital in our fourth type. Out of the issued share capital, we can have what we call the called up. The called up share capital, the called up share capital, the called up share capital. It is usually a portion of the issued share capital. If class, you can recall from our previous topic where we talked about calls on shares, where the directors were empowered by the articles to make a demand that members pay part of the shares that they have taken up in the company. This is the subject matter, or rather this is the capital, the type of share capital on the basis of which calls have been made. That it is that part of the issued share capital that the company directors have made a call in respect of. It is a portion, or it could be the whole of the issued share capital that the company has already made a demand to the holders of those respective shares that they make a payment in respect of the shares they have taken up. Still on the calling of shares, we may also have a portion of the issued share capital that we are describing as uncalled up. Uncalled up share capital. Uncalled up share capital, where we are saying that this will be that portion of the issued share capital that the company directors have not demanded. The company directors have not requested members to make payment for. So if the issued share capital, in respect to the issued share capital, if the whole of the issued share capital has not been demanded for to be paid, then the balance will be the uncalled up share capital. Then on this called up share capital, we can have what we are referring to as the paid up share capital. The paid up share capital. If it is not paid up, then we have what we are referring to as the unpaid up. The unpaid up share capital. The unpaid up share capital. That in respect to the amount that the directors have called up, that which they have already received, then it is referred to as the paid up share capital of the company. This is actually what the company has. It is the money they have actually received in respect of the shares that they have issued. Then there is that part that we have already demanded that members pay, but we are yet to receive. The company is yet to receive that part that they have demanded that members pay in respect of the shares they have. That part not yet received but demanded is referred to as the unpaid up share capital of the company. Now, class, we have some very special category of the uncalled up share capital that we refer to as the reserve. Reserve capital, also known as reserve liability, It is a portion of the uncalled up capital. It is a portion of the uncalled up capital that the company, by a special resolution, resolves that they will not be calling that part except in the case of a winding up. Now, the idea behind not calling up this amount of capital is seen as a way of securing creditors. It gives assurance to creditors that there is still some amount of capital that members are liable to pay towards their shares, that in the event of an insolvent winding up, then there is some faith to creditors that there is still some portion of capital that the members have not yet paid up and are committed by a special resolution that will not be capable of being called up except in the course of winding up a company. So if we could describe the interrelationship between these categories, then you could have something like this, that if this were to be considered to be the registered share capital of the company, then this registered share capital of the company can either be the issued or the unissued share capital of the company. Then in respect of this issued share capital, we may have this as the called up share capital. Then we have the uncalled. Then we have the uncalled up capital of the company. Then in respect of this called up, then we have what we are describing as the paid up capital. Then we also have that part that may be unpaid. That part that may be unpaid up. So this small diagram can be very helpful to describe the interrelationship between or amongst these various categories of share capital that we have described. And it is in respect of this part, that is the uncalled up capital, that we now create our reserve capital. That it is a portion or the whole of the uncalled up capital that the company resolves by a special resolution, that we will not call that part unless we have a winding up process going on, where that part is seen as securing the interest of any creditors who may have a claim against this company in case of an insolvent winding up of the company. So class, these are the various types of share capital that we may have. Now, I want to look at the possibilities of a change alteration of share capital. Alteration of share capital. Now, if a company would have this sort of scenario, that we have been registered with a capital of 1 million, let that be million Kenya shillings, and that 1 million Kenya shilling is divided into 100,000 shares, where the value of a share would be shillings 10, this being the capital, and these are the units that the capital is divided into, then this is the value per unit. Alteration of capital will refer to any transaction that will have the effect of increasing or reducing this capital. Any transaction that will have the effect of increasing or decreasing the units that the capital is divided into, or any transaction that has the effect of increasing or decreasing the value per unit. So these transactions could include the following. So ways of altering share capital. Ways of altering share capital. So the following transactions can be good examples of how capital can be altered. One of them would be redemption of preference shares. So these have to be the sort of preference shares that are redeemable that we have previously looked at and in our previous topic. We could also issuing of additional shares. Issuing of additional shares is a possibility. We also have possible transactions like a conversion issue, conversion of debt to shares, We can also possibly have consolidation of shares. The reverse is also possible, the subdivision. It is also possible to have a subdivision of shares. It is also possible to have a subdivision of shares. And other transactions like diminution of capital. Now, what is happening here? What nature of transactions do we have, and what effect are they going to have as far as alteration of capital is concerned? Now, if part of our share capital was represented by redeemable preference shares, where redemption is the aspect of the company buying back that portion of shares that is the redeemable preference shares, then it would have an effect of ultimately reducing our capital and the number of units that we have as our issued share capital when the company buys back or redeems the redeemable preference shares. Now, we will have some conditions relating to the redemption of preference shares. For instance, the shares themselves have to be issued as redeemable, that they have to have that fact, that right given to the issuing company, that the company can buy them back. It will be a requirement that these shares should be fully paid, that no redemption will be done for partly paid preference shares. That companies may be issuing new shares so that the consideration they get for the issue of the new shares is applied to the redemption of the preference shares. Otherwise, where the redemption is not out of a fresh issue, then it can be redeemed out of reserves. We can have the redemption of preference shares being done out of the capital reserves of this company. We also have this second transaction that has the effect of altering the company's share capital, which is issuing of additional shares. So where our capital was presently 1 million divided into 100,000 shares, this company may choose to increase its share capital by issuing additional shares. So they could be issuing an additional 100,000 to take its share capital to 2 million. The transaction will have the effect of we now have an increased capital with increased units of shares. It is also possible that we can have this third transaction where debt is converted into equity or converted into shares. This will be in respect to particular debt instruments, let's say debentures, that they were issued carrying the right to convert into equity. So when such a transaction happens that we have debt converted into equity in respect of shares, then the effect is that we have added additional equity in respect of shares. It is also possible that we can have a consolidation of shares. The consolidation of shares would be where we take a cluster, a number of shares, and then convert them or add them up into a single share, resulting into a share of a bigger value. For instance, if this company were to consolidate all its shares to take up two shares to form one, then we will have our shares reducing from 100,000 to 50, where the value of a share would be 20. The company would have consolidated the shares, merged them up, two to become one, where now the number of shares, the units drop by half to 50,000, then the value per share goes up from 10 to 20. Now that's a consolidation. The reverse is the subdivision of shares, where we have the present value of share being the present shares being divided into smaller units. For instance, if our shares were to have every share be divided into 2, then we will have our number of units increasing from the present 100,000 to 200, where the value per each unit now falls from 10 to 5. Now that's a subdivision of shares. All these transactions have to be authorized by the Articles of Association, and as you note, they are all resulting into a change or an alteration of the company's share capital. Let me discuss the last of the issues in this lesson, and that is the reduction of share capital. Reduction of share capital. To understand reduction of share capital, I prefer we begin by asking ourselves the question why we may need to reduce. Why would we want to reduce our share capital as a company? Now, if you could trace the basis from this equation where we say that the company's capital is the equivalent of its assets less its liabilities, assuming that our company had no liabilities, then it is true to say that the company's assets is the equivalent of its assets if L is equals to 0. If our company had no liabilities, then it is true to say that the company's capital is the equivalent of its asset. This equation should be seen or should be kept true, that with reference to our books, the capital amount of the company should at all times be the representation of the value of the assets that this company has. It so happens that sometimes the company's assets may fall in value. For instance, where we have had an accident for which we have not received any compensation, then the company's value of assets may fall. Imagine in the event of a fire, we have a company building which was previously represented as the company's assets that has now been burned and destroyed, and no compensation for the same. Then we would say C is no longer equivalent to A as a result of the decline or the fall of the value of A. So where the value of A has gone down, to maintain this equity between C and A, then it may also become necessary to take down the value of C, which we are referring to as the reduction of capital. Now, to the second question, how will we be reducing this capital? What particular transactions may we carry out to end up with a resulting C being reduced? Now, one of the possibilities that we may have, which is the easiest of all the possibilities, is where the company extinguishes. To extinguish or reduce the unpaid up capital, of the company. So that part of the company's share capital that is unpaid up, that we have made a demand to members to pay, but they are yet to pay, then we can extinguish or reduce that liability, where we are simply telling members that they no longer have to pay. They no longer have the obligation to make that payment to the company. The effect is that our C reduces. We also have other possibilities where the company cancelling part of the paid up capital. Cancelling part of the paid up capital. This would be in the event where we do not have unpaid up capital, that the company's called up capital has also been paid up. Then in that eventuality, then we may cancel out a portion of that part of the company's capital that is already paid up. Then finally, we have the last of the options available. It would rarely be an option for us, but it is possible, where we have a company paying off capital back to members. Paying off capital back to members. This would be an extreme case where the company is saying we are going to pay back what we have received from members as capital contributions. Anyway, as extreme as they sound, we are saying these are possibilities that are available to the company to execute a reduction of capital. Now, I want us to look at the process that we will follow if we will need, as a company, to reduce capital. The process of capital reduction. The process of capital reduction. First and foremost, this process has to be authorized by the Articles of Association. Must be authorized. It must be authorized by the Articles. That the Articles must permit. That unless we have the permission of the Articles, we may not reduce capital. So that in a case where we have a company whose Articles do not allow, and the company wishes to, then they would have to begin a further distance where they have to amend the Articles first to allow them to reduce their capital. Then they would now begin the process of reduction of capital. So once we have secured the permission of the Articles to reduce capital, then the company will convene a meeting of members to approve the reduction. So we have the approval of the reduction. Approval of the reduction by members. Approval of the reduction by members. Now, members will be approving this reduction at a members' meeting by passing a special resolution. They pass a special resolution. the resolution is known as a resolution for reduction of capital. Special resolutions will always be supported by a 75% majority vote of all those members present and entitled to vote. So if we get this threshold of support at the members' meeting, then the resolution is rightfully passed and the reduction of capital is successfully approved by the members. Now, once we get this approval by members, then we begin a court approval process. Courts approval of the reduction. Court's approval of the reduction. So the company has to make an application through the directors to the courts to approve the intended reduction. Now, the reason why we involve the courts in the reduction process is that there are particular groups that may be adversely affected by the reduction of capital, that the courts have to confirm that the interests of these specific groups have been catered for. For instance, we are looking at the interests of creditors. We are also looking at the interests of minorities. We are also looking at the interests of minorities. Remember, with a 75% majority approving the reduction, it does not mean everyone else is very happy about the reduction. There is still a balance of 25% that may be seriously affected by the reduction, so we afford them an opportunity to have their issues protected. So in protecting the interests of the creditor, the courts will be asking the company whether we have any creditors of the company that are objecting to the reduction. So if there is any objections we have from the creditors, the question is, what has the company done to secure the interests of that creditor? So the company could be saying that we have paid off all those objecting creditors, or we are providing a guarantee that all these creditors will be paid after the reduction. That is in a bid to ensure that no creditor will be compromised by the reduction of the capital. So the same will happen for the minorities. If any minorities are objecting to the reduction, then again the court confirms how the interest of such minorities has also been respected or observed by this company. So if the court is okay that the creditor's interests are not prejudiced and the minority's interests will not be prejudiced by the reduction, the court will issue an order. The court issues an order. The court issues an order confirming. The court issues an order confirming the reduction. The court issues an order confirming the reduction. In some extreme cases,